What if everything you've been taught about professional transformation, professional development is incomplete? What if the reason you're hitting that same ceiling, despite all of your efforts, all of your hard work, is that you're only addressing one dimension or maybe two dimensions of the overall challenge? Hi, I'm Lauren Crawford. Welcome to this live where we're focusing on the three-dimensional leadership model that I've created. For 25 years, I worked in an organization that frankly had very weak professional development and assessments for us. The tools that they used weren't helpful, so we were left to our own devices. It was really a culture of inefficiency where I found initiative was stifled more than it was encouraged. And that, of course, was very frustrating to someone like me who's very much a go-getter. But the reality was I was firmly gripped in those golden handcuffs of the pay, the benefits, and the security. So I stuck it out. After leaving that job, however, I realized there's fundamental importance in integrating an approach to professional and personal development. They go hand in hand so that we can achieve better performance in our organizations where we're working, and even if we're working individually as a solopreneur, entrepreneur, and our enhancement as individuals as well. So many of the tools available to help us to move forward are limited in the sense that they rely mostly on a mental aspect. They're psychological tools, and they're not necessarily the only way to move us forward. They can be beneficial, but they often leave a deficit as well. So they address issues on a surface level. Operating on the mental side of the equation, again, leaves a gap. So what I'm proposing and what I've developed is a more integrated approach. So it impacts how we show up, not just for work, but in our relationships and more importantly for ourselves. So this three-dimensional framework I've developed does take a more holistic approach. Think of yourself as growing in a more holistic and more sustainable transformation. This is sustainable development. So what are we going to talk about today? First, we're going to look at understanding, well, what are these three dimensions of transformation? Why most approaches fail to address our growth well because of this focus on maybe only one or possibly two of the dimensions. And then how this integration method creates lasting change. And then lastly, we'll have a little bit of demonstration of how this works, and we'll open up to a Q&A at the end. All right, so we want to start out by looking at the first one of these dimensions, and this is thinking patterns. So what are thinking patterns? So these are the mental models. These are the belief systems and our saboteur patterns that shape how we perceive reality and how we make decisions. So our mental patterns and our belief systems, they get hardwired into us very early in life. By the time we're 5 or some say 7, we've got a lot of our programming already in there around about how this whole thing, this life that we're living works. And then we end up in higher education and we end up in certain career paths. And those also inform or further imprint thinking patterns and beliefs. And some of these aren't necessarily beneficial for us in terms of our personal and professional advancement. This domain of mindset training that we end up in our professional careers, these can look like those weekend seminars of self-improvement and that sort of thing. They do fall short on many fronts. I also want us to look at the saboteurs. So this is an area of expertise that I have around personal intelligence and how these play out. So we have a primary judge, this voice in our head that's always judging, and it's first and foremost. And it judges us, ourselves, it judges others, and it judges circumstances. It causes a lot of disappointment, anger, regret, guilt, shame, anxiety. So when you're feeling any of those emotions, chances are you're in the judge mode. It also has some accomplishing saboteurs, and there are 9 of them. The judge, for example, will tell us that without me pushing you, you'll be lazy and you'll be complacent. Without me punishing you for your mistakes, you're not going to learn and you'll keep repeating them. Without me scaring you about the bad future and possible outcomes, you won't work to prevent them. Without me judging others, you would lose your objectivity and not protect your own self-interest. Without me making you feel bad and bad about your outcomes, you won't do anything to change. Does that sound familiar? Have you had those voices in your head? Worse yet, there are these 9 accomplice saboteurs. So not only do we have this primary judge, we also have accomplices to it. And they show up. So you're going to see them in your colleagues and workplaces. Sometimes it's easier to see them in others, but they're in ourselves as well. So let's explore a few of those. So one of the main ones is the controller. I shouldn't say main because everyone's going to be a little bit different in terms of these 9, and they may show up at different stages in your life at different levels. So the controller, who has a strong energy and need to control and to take charge, to connect with others through competition, through challenge, through physicality even, and conflict rather than through emotions. So these are very willful individuals, confrontational. They're the straight talker. They're going to tell it like it is. They push people beyond their comfort zones. This comes alive when they're doing the impossible and beating the odds. So they like those challenges. And then those aspects of them are going to come forward. They are stimulated by conflict. And this is something that drives them. And they are often surprised when others are hurt by their actions or their way of showing up. And you may recognize some of these patterns in maybe colleagues, family members, maybe even yourself. They do intimidate others for sure. And they have this sort of in-your-face communication style. And that's often interpreted by others as anger or criticism, when it may not be. Another is the avoider. So this one might be pretty obvious. They tend to avoid conflicts and they say yes to things that really they don't want to be doing. They downplay the importance of the real problems, and they try to deflect these issues onto others or just to avoid them. They have difficulty saying no. They resist others through passive aggressive means rather than being upfront and direct. There's a loss of self, confronting routines and habits. So they kind of get lost in that. And they will be major procrastinators because they don't like unpleasant tasks, even though unpleasant tasks are part of reality. Let's look at another one, the hyperachiever, and this is me. Very competitive. They like image and status. They're conscious that way. Good at covering up insecurities and showing a positive image at all times. Because what would the expense be of having someone not see you in a good light? They adapt their personality to fit what would most impress others that they are engaging with. Very goal-oriented, and they do tend to have a workaholic streak in them. They're more into perfecting that public image than they are at the deep introspection, that looking within and seeing what might be going on. They can be very self-promoting, and they can keep people at a safe distance just so that people don't get to see the real truth of what's happening. That's examples of the saboteurs. Now, let's explore a little bit the traditional models of personal development, personal growth. They use tools that focus almost exclusively on mental models, as I mentioned. So also thinking patterns and belief systems. And much of this is measurable and it is viewed as what can be fixable, like what can we fix by using certain tools and techniques that can further engage the mind. And what they're lacking is a deeper component of self-awareness that reflects the whole being. There might be mental, reflections and that sort of thing, but a more integrated reflection of the whole being. This limitation is, if you think of it, it's thinking our way to transformation. So we humans get trapped in this thinking trap all the time, thinking our way through things, think, and think some more. Men in particular, we're geared to more of this left brain thinking, analytical processing. We can get stuck in that loop. So we try to change mindset, but miss the root problem when we're using these approaches. Mental fitness shows us how we can get out of our heads and into our bodies. And this is an area where I have expertise as a mental fitness coach and a purpose coach. We need this necessarily as we move into the 3 dimensions of change. So let's look at an example here just to make this a little bit more concrete. A current client of mine who's a very smart guy, he worked his way up in the organization where he was to that highest position, starting at a lower level and being a hard worker. He had high controller tendencies. He had a high stickler saboteur, and the stickler just wants everything precise and right. He was hyper vigilant. He had that saboteur as well. He had the hyperachiever saboteur. All of those tendencies helped him to rise to the top. And he was able to achieve more in a limited time than many people could. And you might think, well, isn't that a good thing? Here's the reality. It all came crashing down when his body shut down. It just said no more. So he went into burnout mode, was forced out of the workplace, and that led to a 2-year recovery. And eventually the work relationship was severed through illegal means. And now he's in the process of reinventing his life. This is what can happen when we're not engaging in our own self-growth and self-development in a more holistic way. And this we want to look at from both the professional and I would argue the personal, because they mirror each other. So that's an example of what can go on when we're not looking at a three-dimensional approach to our growth. I'd like you to take a moment to just reflect on saboteurs. So I gave you a couple examples. There are 9 of them. When we look at the word saboteur, you'll have a sense of what that may look like or feel like. So I'm going to invite you just to reflect, even if you don't have a name for it, what might be a pattern that you recognize where you self-sabotage. Is it a judge? The main saboteur is the judge, where there's this constant critical voice going on. We looked at the hyperachiever, the controller. There's the avoider, the stickler, as I just mentioned. So the stickler wants everything right, and everything has to be 100% perfect, and they spend lengthy hours trying to perfect things. There's the pleaser, who wants to make sure that everything's, working well out there, that everyone's pleased and happy. And then there's the victim. A victim is interesting because the victim saboteur is insidious. It's very sneaky and quiet. And many times, especially men, we don't pick up that we've got a little bit of this saboteur going on. So just take a moment. When do you recognize some of this showing up in your life, in your professional life, and in your personal life? Saboteuring energies, ideas, hijacking. We call it hijacking. So you can continue to reflect on that. And then we're going to move into dimension 2. So dimension 2 here is the physical experience. So what do we mean by this? This is the way that our bodies hold, express, and respond to our reality. So what's going on around us. And this includes energy patterns, it includes physical sensations, and it includes embodied wisdom. Another thing that we humans aren't so great at is listening to our bodies. And I would argue men more so than women. In fact, most of humanity, in my view, walks around like our heads are severed from our bodies. All of this mental activity, this thinking, got to figure it out, think our way through it, that actually becomes very pathological. And we get trapped in these thinking ways of being. And then we start to miss signs of our body. Our body's always sending us messages and signals, but we totally miss them. We miss how chronic stress might be creating some deeper physical problems, how issues get buried in our tissues. And if we don't spend time sensing the body, we're going to miss all of that. How lack of life force, energy naturally flowing through the body will create imbalance. And it'll start by just feeling a dis-ease in the body. But what does that dis-ease lead to? It leads to disease. Bring the dis and the ease together, it leads to disease. And we wonder why we have so many health issues and challenges, because part of the way that we're living isn't integrated. Part of the way that we're growing isn't integrated. And as professionals, part of the way we're showing up in those professional roles isn't integrated. These patterns get locked in and they become limiting, like they're actually limiting behaviors that end up. Why? Because the thinking creates emotions. So when we're thinking all the time, the thinking leads to certain emotions. And think of emotions as simply energy and motion. And what ends up happening is those emotions create hormonal cocktails that flood our bodies. So emotions don't just happen in the brain or in the head, they infect our whole body. So these hormonal cocktails will flood the body with certain emotions. And then what ends up happening is our bodies get addicted to that hormonal cocktail flooding our systems. And so in that addiction, what happens is we crave and we want to repeat those same feelings and emotions to get that hit of that hormonal cocktail in our body. And I love the way that Dr. Joe Dispenza talks about this. He says that our bodies effectively become our minds, because the way that this pattern of thinking, emotions, hormonal cocktail release, and the cycle that creates is equivalent to an addiction. Our bodies become our minds. So we want to understand and connect to the body in an intelligent way, in an integrated way, not moving into this default mode that I just shared with you. So when we pay closer attention to our bodies, we learn that it often knows what the mind doesn't. By feeling how something feels in our bodies, we can know if it's right, if it's the best choice for us or not. So it's not just about, does this tell me that's the right choice? Does the data tell me it's the right choice? The body is going to send you a clear message as well. There's deep intelligence within us, but we remain so stubbornly connected to and addicted to our mental processes, thinking that they are the right way. We discredit things that seem like they're too out there, too woo-woo, because they're out of our program beliefs of what's right and wrong. And instead, we bulldoze forward until the body refuses any longer. Just like my client, the example I shared with you a moment ago. So, and in that case, even he wasn't prepared to step away. He had to be given a medical directive to do so. So this hard, persistent mental wanting to control everything with the mind and the thoughts, not necessarily helpful. We must therefore bring this physical dimension into our self-understanding, having this body awareness. This is part of personal growth. This is part of how we do our self-assessments, our professional assessments. There is a bi-directional relationship between physical and mental patterns. And these reveal the truths that we must learn to acknowledge and accept. So what does research say about this? Well, I love looking at how the Heart Math Institute looks at things, and it looks at heart coherence. And it is shown how physical states directly influence mental functioning and decision-making. And many of the techniques used in creating heart coherence are actually the same or mirroring tools that we use to address our saboteurs, which I'm going to discuss in just a little while. This is amazing work. And how I like to work with clients is a lot of times when we start having our conversations, they'll be like, I think this. Well, I think. And I'm like, okay, let's just pause. And I invite them to drop into their heart. And this can be really like, what do you mean drop into my heart? So we want to get to this place where we can drop into our heart center. I'm not talking about the physical organ that's pumping blood. I'm talking about the energy center in the middle of the chest. There's a powerful intelligence there. It's the second mind. There's also a mind in the gut, right? So we don't just have the intellectual mind to draw upon. This idea of connecting with the intelligence in the body is so important. We have wisdom there. And we can make better and more informed decisions when we tap into that. This intuitive aspect, in my view, must be brought out of the sort of like closet where it's kind of locked away and brought into our realm of professional dynamics and how we look at growth and personal development and professional development. And recent research has been done on the neuroscience of embodied cognition, which is very cool, and how our physical states affect decision-making, just as the Heart Math Institute. The classic models of decision-making are really minimal and simplistic economic models. So they're isolated in such a way that everything is really rigorously monitored. And when we open that up into a broader model that is more integrated and more inclusive of the body, then we can better understand decision-making as the complex process that it is, where all of the components in the mind-body structure are at play. It's not just an intellectual process of, do I choose A or do I choose B? It's much more nuanced than that. Again, let's look at how this plays out. A lot of men may think that because they exercise or work out, that they're connecting to their physical body. And they are activating their physical body, but it's not in the same realm that I'm talking about here. So exercise doesn't equate to self-development and personal growth necessarily. We can actually have patterns of exercise that are imbalancing. And while I'm not going to be one to ever say don't exercise, I'm going to say that we also need to look at how we're doing that. So if we're pushing ourselves really hard, especially in midlife, if we're pushing ourselves really hard, if we're overtasking the body, this idea of more is the best approach. No pain, no gain. Well, not necessarily. We need balance, especially again at this stage in life. And I'm a strong advocate for yoga because yoga has been something that's really, really impacted me. And I've been teaching it for over 20 years. And I can see how powerful it is to influence people in terms of helping them to live in a more integrated way. The mindful movement that's involved there, where we're really linking movement, the mind, and the breath, it's a powerful overall integration approach that we learn on the mat. And when we learn that on the mat, we take that out into our lives. This can similarly be achieved through other systems or modalities like Tai Chi and Qigong. So these approaches need to be experienced. You can read about all this stuff. Like I know a lot of us are because we're heady, right? We're thinkers. We think, well, we'll read the book again, we'll read the book a third time. Reading is information. Reading is not transformation. Transformation requires the doing. It requires the experience. Just like with yoga, you can come and have an experience in a yoga class, and maybe it's not the best one, but you need to find the model, the modality that works for you. And that's the same in all aspects of life. So when we connect in this way, we have better discernment, we have better understanding, we make better decisions. So I'd like you to take a moment to reflect on what you know or what you suspect or are aware of in terms of physical signals that maybe you've noticed that tell you you're not in alignment, or that things aren't aligned in your work. Any of this stuff where your body's been sending you some messages. Just take a moment to reflect on that. If you're watching the recording, go ahead and share your stuff in the comments for sure. I know for me, when things are amiss, I'll have a anxious flurry and my armpits will suddenly be drenched. And that will tell me I'm being provoked in different ways. So we're going to move into the third dimension of this three-dimensional approach. And this is vital intelligence. So what is vital intelligence? What are we talking about here? It's our deeper knowing. And it's about more of a soul-driven purpose. So it's not the intellect. It's the wisdom that operates beyond analytical thinking. And it connects us to our authentic path. So think about that. Are you connected to, plugged into, are you even aware of your authentic path? I did provide a brief overview of the saboteurs above, and we want to maybe look a little bit more at that as we go into this vital intelligence stuff. It's important to distinguish when a saboteur is messing with your mind as opposed to, is that an intuitive thought that I'm having? Is it that heart mind that's speaking to me? Is it that gut mind that's speaking to me? Or is it a saboteur kind of messing with my head? I always do this when I talk about the saboteurs because it's like that voice back there that's blah, blah, blah. So the saboteurs are going to constantly be telling us lies. They get us stuck in patterns of doubt, and they are essentially based in negativity. So if you're experiencing some negative thoughts, chances are you're stuck in saboteur mode. One of the saboteurs, or maybe they like to play off of each other, so it could be more than one, are messing with you. The saboteur interference will feel like a lot of mind chatter. It's very tight and contracted, and it's based in fear, and it's going to have a negative tone for sure. You'll feel a little bit caged in. So to the last section on the body, you might feel tight in your body when things aren't going well. When we have that awareness, that body awareness, then we're able to, again, link here into this deeper vital intelligence in a more succinct way. So the saboteurs are also largely left brain activity. And then I'm really making this super simplistic so that we can just understand it. Left brain is where all the logical, analytical, linear, rational thought processing happens. As I mentioned, the saboteurs are also steeped in fear. So they want to protect us. Initially, they come from a good place. We develop these as children, and then as adults, they get totally blown out of proportion, and they don't serve us well. They actually interfere. So with vital intelligence, we all have to get to this place of recognizing that we have mental patterns, that these saboteurs and the way that our society privileges left brain thinking, that these all prevent us from tapping into vital intelligence. What does it look like? It's this idea of getting out of your head, dropping into that heart-centered, trusting those deeper impulses that come up. This can be a hard sell because a lot of us will think, well, that stuff's woo-woo. It's not based on any science. It's not real. It is real because it's who we are. And don't just take my word for it. Take what Jeff Bezos, the head of Amazon, had to say, and think of Amazon and think of him, one of these pillars of modern society as a multi-billionaire who's created this analytically data-driven organization. But what did he have to say? All of my best decisions in business and in life have been made with the heart, intuition, guts, and not analysis. He goes on to qualify that sometimes decisions can be made with analysis, and if they can be, maybe they should be. But then he clarified that further by saying, well, analysis is necessary for some decisions. The most important and strategic ones are ultimately guided by intuition, taste, and instinct. So that's coming from one of our modern pillars in society. Like them or not, that's powerful stuff. And many other high-level CEOs draw on their gut impulses, on ideas that come to them when they're out for a walk in nature. And maybe you've read some of this in some of these bios that are out there, right? They'll have a flash of insight in their morning run, or maybe while they're sitting in meditation. So these answers and solutions are revealed to them. They're not a product of thinking hard. And that's what the saboteurs will have us do. Think harder, think harder. Let's get a bunch of people together and brainstorm and think hard. And that's not necessarily going to take us to the correct or the right answer that is needed. So it's not coming from overthinking and mental engagement. So here are some other examples. Charles Darwin, the forefather of a lot of our modern understanding, some of it now being criticized because it so compartmentalizes things. He scheduled contemplative walks every day, and that's where he got a lot of his insights. Albert Einstein viewed his daily walks at Princeton as an integral part of his creative process. How cool is that? Steve Jobs was famously known for doing these walking meetings where they walked side by side because he felt like that communing of walking side by side instead of across the table from each other fostered much more creative and interesting and natural interaction. The other thing about this three-dimensional thing is it's steeped in us as natural beings. So the challenge with all this is that our personal and professional regimes aren't here yet. They haven't arrived at this stage. But we must make a bold pivot if the human and organizational development that we're striving for the social change that is so needed out there, for the corporate culture change that's needed, for the changing of the geopolitical landscape that's out there, we must step away from some of these outdated models of personal growth and self-development that are limited to mental processes that are privileged by corporations and individuals as well. No longer can we look at this more holistic and integrated approach as being out there or for those people. It needs to be included in all aspects, all walks of life. So when we do the necessary self-discovery work in midlife, this helps us to reconnect with purpose, because you don't have the same purpose you did in your 30s and 40s. If you think you do, you might want to revisit that. So some of the angst we start to feel in our mid-late 40s into our 50s and 60s, that's because we've lost focus with purpose. We've lost our connection, our alignment with purpose. So when we can align and we can move into that, again, deeper understanding, we can really achieve enhanced and sustainable performance in all areas, better relationships, our overall well-being. And who doesn't want that? This is where fulfillment in life comes from. It's not about chasing the title, the dollar figure, the material stuff. We start to realize that at some stage in our lives. Those who don't and stay connected and stuck in that realm are ultimately going to be missing a big part of the overall picture. So I would ask, what's the holdup in terms of making these changes? Well, it starts with you. You start in your personal life and you bring it to your organizations, whatever level you're at in those organizations. My connection to vital intelligence happened quite by accident when I started down the yoga path and started to use breathwork and meditation. The whole lens through which I saw myself shifted. And I was better able to show up in my life as a more integrated whole. This certainly wasn't an overnight thing, trust me. And I was known as the angry guy, like at work and in my personal life for sure. If you talk to my family members, I was the angry guy. I was just steeped in anger. And so when we start to do more of this integrated whole work, it shifts us on so many levels. There's only so much mental personal development we can do. We need more integrated aspects of that. It's not about necessarily just attending these weekend workshops or an emotional intelligence seminar. We have to start to think bigger than that so that we can begin to break down these patterns and make our lives more rich and fulfilling on so many levels. We need sustainable practices to create the sustainable change that we're looking for. And mental fitness will help with that mental side of things, as does meditation. A balanced mind and body integration activity will weave in that physical dimension. And when we do this, we learn to trust our inner guide more. So in yoga, there's this notion of the inner guide, the Adi Guru, the inner teacher. And we want to tap into that. We want to have that help to inform us, not just patterned thinking modalities that no longer serve us. I'm going to pose another question to you. So think about a time when you made a decision that looked wrong on paper, but even though it looked wrong on paper, it felt right. And how did that turn out? Any insight you have about making a decision that felt right in the gut? And that can be professional, or it could be personal. I welcome you to share that. You can share it in the comments if you're watching the recording. So finally, where we want to start going with this is to look into our integration vis-a-vis, well, how does this all start to play out then? How do we move forward in an integrated way? There's an assessment tool that I've created for you that's going to be available for you in the comments, so you can download it and work with it. And how this works is it's really a walkthrough of where you're at in these three dimensions. And it's going to give you a few questions that you're going to reflect upon and then do a little bit of grading of yourself. Let me walk you through a little bit of that right now. When you're doing this process, you want to commit to it daily for a regular period of time. And I'm going to say, going into at least a few weeks. So let me walk you through a little bit of how this is going to look. And again, you'll find this in the download, and I encourage you to open it up and give it a go, because it will be perhaps the first step to start moving you into this more integrated self in terms of self-development, self-growth. All right, so I'm going to pose a few questions here, and this will be like a mini self-assessment, if you will, where we're going to explore three areas. And when I ask these questions, I'd like you to score yourself from 1 to 5 for each, with 1 being rarely and 5 being, oh yeah, that's consistently true. So if you want, you can grab something to write these down to keep a little record for yourself. So the first one is, of course, the first dimension, which is the thinking patterns. I can identify when my saboteurs are active and shift to more helpful thought patterns. And again, if you're not sure of the exact saboteurs, just think of it as that critical thinking stuff. I can identify when my saboteurs are active and shift to more helpful thought patterns. 1 is low, 5 is, yeah, I can do that all the time. The second one, physical experience. I regularly notice how my body feels during work and use this information to guide my decisions. I regularly notice how my body feels during work, and I use this information to guide my decisions. So when you're in a meeting, you're working on a project, you're working with a team, how often can you drop into your body and just know what your body is feeling and telling you? Not so good at that. 1, yeah, I do that all the time. 5. Good. And the last one, of course, is the third, the vital intelligence. So my work decisions honor my deeper purpose, even when it's challenging. My work decisions honor my deeper purpose, even when it's challenging. So yeah, they honor my deeper purpose all the time. 5, almost never. 1. And if you're not sure about deeper purpose, then you're going to rate it lower, right? Good. The dimension with your lower score is the area where you're going to want to do some of that development and have a little bit of a development plan. And I'm going to share with you next what some of that can look like. In the handout, there's going to be a series of questions under each, so it'll be much more comprehensive. So just acknowledge then where you're at. And if you're watching the recording, you could share what your observations were just from reflecting on those 3 questions. What came up for you, for example? Here's a powerful way for us to do a little bit of a pattern interrupt, we'll call it. And so this can be, again, we're moving into some tools now that can be really, really helpful for you to start to operationalize, integrate these aspects. If we're doing this, let's call this the 3-point reset. That can be really, really helpful. So again, pattern interrupts are important because once we get into that mental spiral, we're just gone, right? And if we can just stop it, and that takes diligence, that takes focus, right? If we can just stop it, and then we can shift gears energetically, that's great. That doesn't mean it's necessarily going to go away, but you've taken the opportunity to shift course. So what does this look like? So step 1, pause. Take 1 conscious breath. This interrupts your thinking pattern and brings awareness to the present moment. So you find yourself in a mental flurry. You're in a situation where you're overwhelmed. You take a deeper breath, right? You feel your feet firmly on the ground. You just take your awareness to your feet on the ground and you notice that. And then just quickly notice 3 other sensations in your body. Notice what's going on in your legs. Notice how your hands are feeling. Notice your spine. So you just notice on a physical level, just 1, 2, 3. And then ask yourself quickly. So this is a very easy, accessible process. So you're not overthinking it. So after you take your breath, you feel the ground, you feel 3 areas of your body, you ask yourself, what would my wisest self do here? What would my wisest self do here? Not my reactionary pattern self, my wisest self. And you see what comes up. This entire process should only take about 15 or 20 seconds. It interrupts the pattern that you're in, and it becomes a process to develop these 3 dimensions we've been talking about simultaneously. Let's do a real life example then, just to help you out here. So I received feedback from my presentation that it wasn't on the mark. And as soon as I got that feedback, my judge immediately says, I'm not good enough, And I notice in that moment, my breathing gets shallow. My shoulders get tense. I pause. I take a breath. I feel my feet on the floor. I notice my hands. I notice my spine. I notice my jaw. I ask myself, what would my wisest self do in this situation? And then the response might be, well, know that this isn't about your self-worth. This isn't a reflection on you. So the wiser self calms you down. And then from that reset state, you can then respond thoughtfully. This is about learning how to be out of that reactionary mode that so many of us get into, that spirals us and winds us up. I'm going to share with you now yet another practice. And this is something you can start to do immediately. The 3-dimensional check-in only takes, again, a couple of minutes each morning to do. And this is described in the handout again, and the reminder will be there for you to activate this. If you want to start to program yourself in a way that you are more set up for your day, from the thinking dimension, you can start by asking, and this could be you're sitting in your car and you're going to head off for work. So before you put it into gear and go, again, you create these little methodologies. What saboteur is most likely to show up for me today, and how will I respond when it does? So again, we listed several saboteurs, and I'll include a list in the downloads for you later in the comment section. What saboteur is most likely to show up for me today? If you've got something planned and you know your judge might get in there and beat you up, your stickler might get in there and have you being super, super precise and wasting a whole bunch of time on the minutia that's not important. Whatever it may be, you're going to acknowledge what it might be. And then from the physical dimension, how does my body feel right now? And what does it need to be at its best for today? What does my body need to be at its best today? So again, you're checking in with your body. And again, this is just before you head off to work, right? And then the last bit is the vital dimension. What matters most deeply about work for me today? So we're checking in. What saboteurs might show up? So we're going to preemptively be kind of prepared for something to go awry. That's good, because that's also breaking down patterns. It's going to break down reactivity. Physically, we're teaching ourselves to plug into our body. What's my body feeling right now? And in this vital dimension, we're honoring that bigger part of our being by what matters most deeply for me at work today. So that's a technique that you can do 1 to 2 minutes before you head out the door. And it will start to shift how you begin to integrate all of these dimensions we've been talking about into your daily life. I would recommend keeping a record of this too. It could be a phone note on your phone, or maybe you've got it on a notepad, and just rate yourself. What was my mental clarity? Was it from 1 to 5? What was my physical energy like from 1 to 5? What was my sense of purpose like from 1 to 5? We just want to start being more conscious. We want to start living more consciously, get out of our patterns, get out of our habitual way. You know that we are driven by the subconscious some 90% of the day. So we need to necessarily activate new processes that we do daily and regularly. So going to the mindset workshop for a weekend, going to the emotional intelligence workshop for the weekend and thinking our lives are going to change, they're not. You'll get some good information, you'll have a hit, and you'll go back and the patterns will kick in 2 days from now. So we want to do these practices so that we're building new neural pathways. We're working with the brain in the way that we can modify, integrate, so that we're getting the most out of our personal development and out of our professional growth. And you're going to be developing practical awareness on these 3 dimensions. And that to me is what's most important, because this isn't theoretical. None of this is theoretical. This is all practical. So this simple practice that I just described creates a bridge between understanding these concepts and living them. By intentionally addressing all 3 dimensions each morning, you're training your system to operate in an integrated way. And it will get stronger day by day by day, week by week, month by month, year by year. And you'll change, you'll evolve, you'll become this brighter version of yourself. The real power here is in consistency. And that's where we humans can fail, right? We can start something and drop it and go back into our comfort zone a week or 2 later. So consistent daily work, and use the worksheet that I'll provide for you in the description and the comments to give yourself a tool to work with. And just a few minutes a day, do it for the next 14 days to start. And I guarantee you'll start to notice a difference in your life. So what I'd like to do now is just to wrap up by encapsulating what are these 3 dimensions. So we have the the thinking patterns aspect of who we are. So we're starting to recognize how our mind is often trapped in its thinking mode, and that we can get out of that by bringing awareness to how we're working with the mind, by understanding that we have these saboteurs that are going to get in there and tell us lies and keep us trapped in negative thought processes, the judge being the first and foremost. That it isn't just mindset stuff that needs to happen. It's a whole integrated system that needs to be at play. The second is the physical experience. And so understanding the body in a much more integrated way. So the body and the mind are connected, right? What we experience mentally isn't isolated to this mind, the brain, the head. We have a mind in the heart. We have a mind in the gut. There's deep intuitive knowledge within us. And so when we start to play with the body in a way of understanding it, listening to how the energy is moving, listening to how the body is responding to what we're going through throughout the day in our work life and even in our personal lives, then we start to have a deeper integrated understanding of my body's wisdom and inherent intelligence. And then the last bit is the vital intelligence bit. And this is the more subtle stuff. This is the stuff of, who am I more in a larger perspective? Who am I from a purpose point of view? And when we start to align all three of these, this is when that integrated whole is really serving us well. I'll share with you the 3-dimensional assessment worksheet. I welcome you to explore that. As I said, committing to doing this practice for the next 14 days and just monitor, engage, and see how you're doing. I'll also be running a mental fitness cohort early in 2026. And if that's something that you would like to explore, learning how to work in a more methodical way with these saboteurs so that we can understand them when they're coming up, catch them when they're coming up, and then shift the narrative from the saboteur mind to more of that sage higher mind side, so that we're making and living, making better decisions and living in a more harmonious and integrated way. And you can also just reach out to me one-on-one for a little bit of an exploration. If you've got some questions that you'd like, I'll leave the email for you as well. So my final thought on all of this is with respect to professional and personal transformation. It isn't about becoming someone else. It's really about plugging in and accessing that deeper part of yourself, becoming fully yourself. And that gets veiled, that gets lost through our busy lives and through all of these external influences. So we want to be able to understand ourselves across all dimensions of our being, not just this thinking part of our being. So the greatest leaders I know are not just mentally sharp or physically present or deeply purposeful. They're all three of those. And you can be too. So if any of those areas feel like they're lacking, this is important and essential work for you to explore. So that's what I have for you today. It's great being here. And I hope that there was something that helped you in terms of your own self through what I presented today. And I look forward to seeing you again. Take good care.